And welcome back once again to How to Survive 2025. I'm Brian Keene.
I'm Dacia M. Arnold.
I'm Jim Cobb.
And I apologize there. I was making a mistake at the very end of this recording, or at the very beginning of this recording. Boy, I'm just making all kinds of mistakes today. But that's okay because it ties in with today's topic, which is what, Dacia?
Common prepping mistakes.
There we go. There we go. And Jim, I think it only fitting that you lead us in today's discussion since you have forgotten more about prepping than Dacia and I or our listeners will ever remember.
Well, let's hope not, because then we're in trouble. We have I would say, a significant portion of our audience for How to Survive 2025 are fairly new to prepping. We have a lot of seasoned people as well, but I would say the majority of people who are watching or listening to this are pretty new to the concept and looking for, how do I get started? I want to do this the right way. I feel overwhelmed, things like that. In the nearly 40 some years that I've been circling around the prepper world, I've noticed that there are several mistakes that people make often, and they're easily avoided if you know to look for them. One of the first ones that we see, and this is probably honestly the most common one right off the bat, is you have people who just want to throw money at the problem.
Right.
They just want to go out and buy everything and anything that they feel is necessary, or worse, that's recommended to them by any number of YouTube influencers and things like that. The problem is, you have two parts of the prepper equation. You have stuff and you have skills. Anybody who's been around for a little while will tell you that skills are more important than stuff. But skills and stuff work together better than either of them work independently. You can have all the stuff you want on the planet, but if you don't know how to use it, if you don't know what it's good for, you don't know how to maintain it, it's not going to be worth very much to you. All you're going to end up being is a loot drop for somebody else.
I have a quick question, Jim, on that note of money. So in recording this is we're about a week into the fires in LA.
Mm-hmm.
When we release this, I believe it'll be 2 weeks into the fires. Is there a thing as having more money than time, and being able to throw enough money into it where that busy people can also be quote unquote prepared?
Well, there's something to be said for having a significant prepping budget.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, don't get me wrong. If you're able to work out your finances such that you have a pretty good cushion that you can toss towards prepping, that's not a bad thing. The problem is, you have to couple it with education, training, and practice. You can't just buy a shit ton of stuff and say, okay, I'm good. It just doesn't work like that. And that leads into the next couple of mistakes we're going to talk about.
Well, I would point out to new listeners, maybe if you're just tuning in for the first time or you've only started listening recently, as this podcast, because this is a limited series podcast, and as we get closer to the end of the series, if you go back to the beginning, we talk about these things at length.
Mm-hmm.
Water, for example, sure, you can go to Costco and buy all the cases of bottled water that they have there, but you need to know how to store that. You need to know what to do with it when it runs out, because eventually it will run out. You need to know how to. So what Jim says is perfect. It's a combination of stuff and skills, and in a grid down scenario, eventually the skills are going to come into play because you are going to run out of stuff. The other thing is to keep in mind is increments. You know, when everything shut down during the COVID pandemic,
Mm.
um, you know, my wife and her family were both very, very freaked out. They're like, how are we going to get stuff? You know, the grocery store's out of toilet paper. There's no bottled water. Well, we had the stuff here because I'd slowly stockpiled a little bit with each paycheck and each trip to the grocery store, which we also talked about in a
Mm-hmm.
previous episode. I suspect we'll see that again in 2025. A dear friend of mine who lives on a houseboat in San Francisco sent me a picture this morning. Every grocery store near him is out of eggs. There's no eggs anywhere
Yeah.
in San Francisco. No explanation for it. Just, you know, maybe the fires are holding up deliveries further, a little further north up in LA. I don't know. Uh, but, you know, supply chain issues can happen even when it's not a grid down scenario. So, you know, sure
Yep.
stuff, but stuff in increments and supplement that, of course, with skills.
Absolutely.
So,
You know, talking about shortages and supply chain interruptions, like you said, it doesn't have to be a grid down scenario. You get a trucker strike. You know, that's all it takes
Mhm.
for a little bump, because so many retailers use their just in time approach to stocking shelves. You know,
Mm.
we're all old enough to remember the days when retail stores had big warehouses in the back, big stock rooms. You know,
Mhm.
you could legitimately say to a worker, "Hey, I don't see any more of this on
Mhm.
the shelf. Could you go look in back?" And there was an in back for them to go look. That doesn't exist anymore.
Huh.
They don't have those anymore. It goes from the truck to the shelf. That's it. So if the truck doesn't show up, there's nothing to put on
That's
that
it.
shelf.
Wow. I
You
didn't
know,
realize that. I thought
oh,
there was a back still.
I mean, there
Huh.
might be to a small extent, but it's nowhere near what it used to be.
Yeah.
More and more retailers decided that floor space
Yeah.
is better served selling things than stocking
Mhm.
things.
well,
Um, Go ahead.
I'm sorry. This kind of ties into our next one, but I'm actually jumping around. But it seems like it's a good fit. Um, Talk a little bit about balance here, Jim.
Yeah,
You know, we're using the example of like
Mhm.
bottled water or this or that. Um, you know, what if you're somebody who's sunk tens of thousands of dollars into really good firearms and
Yeah.
ammunition, and you know, maybe you got yourself a couple
knives.
grenades for the house, but you know, you've got less than a week's worth of food. Is that a problem?
Yeah, that's a big problem. I mean, and we see this a lot. I mean, a lot of people, once you really kind of get immersed into the whole prepper thing, a lot of people develop their little favorite categories. You know,
Mm.
some people really like the firearms, some people really like the food preservation and the scratch cooking, some people really get off on the gardening, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. The the problem comes in when you become hyper focused in that one area and you neglect all the other areas. You know, the example that Brian gave about firearms versus food, that's one that I use all the time because that's one of the most common that I see. But you'll also see people who they will have umpteen cases of freeze dried food and, you know, home canned food on the shelves and all of that, but they have no way to protect themselves. They have
Mm.
no interest in learning how to protect themselves. You know, it has to be a balance. I'm not saying you can't overindulge in certain areas. You just have to watch for neglecting areas. You need to seek out that first aid training. You need to know CPR. You need to learn how to use an AED. You need to learn how to preserve food at home. You need to
Mhm.
learn how to cook food. You need to learn how to fire a firearm and hit what you're aiming at. You know, all of these things are important. And honestly, it's kind of hard to prioritize
Mhm.
in a general sense because, you know, one of my favorite sayings is there is no one size fits all solution in the prepper world. no matter what we're talking about, there is no one answer that's going to be applicable equally for everybody. You need to look at your own situation and decide where your efforts would be best served to focus on, at least initially, and then go from there.
To avoid like analysis paralysis,
Mm-hmm.
one technique that you could do is that one area, if you're just starting, that one area that you are interested in, set up a stopping point for that so that you
Yeah.
don't like spiral into this one hole of canning food, canning food, canning food until I have 365 days of food for
Mm-hmm.
my 10 people family.
Right.
uh, Come up with like a 1 month, a 2 month, a 3 month, and then stop, and
Mm-hmm.
then shift your focus to another area.
Yep. That's an excellent way to approach it. Definitely.
As far as prioritizing for somebody who is starting out, is there something either of you recommend they focus on at the very beginning more than others? Would it be food and water? Would it be self protection? Is there a
In a very general sense, I would say food and water are good starting points. I think being able to feed your family is one of the things that drives people to prepping more than anything else. The fear of the cabinets are empty, there is no store to go to, we're hungry, is a very powerful motivator for a lot of people to begin prepping. And that's not a bad starting point. But don't feel like you need to immediately invest in 6 months worth of food before you can do anything else. As Dacia said, set yourself smaller goals. Let's say if we're going to talk about food storage, shoot for 2 weeks. That for your first goal, have enough food on hand to feed your family for 14 days, all meals. Once you hit that point, then shift over to something else, whether it's first aid or what have you, and maintain that 2 week level of food. Don't
Mhm.
let it diminish. Maintain it there and slowly build it up as you move forward. What Brian was talking about earlier, don't try to do it all at once, little bits at a time. Every time you go to the grocery store, add one or two things to your cart that are specifically for emergency use or for your food stockpile, and just build it up over time. There aren't many people listening to this right now who could afford to go out and drop enough money to afford 6 months worth of food, right? Just like that.
Mhm.
Okay. I know I couldn't,
Mhm.
but I can certainly add enough to my cart over the next month. Every time I go to the store, add a couple of things. It adds up pretty quick. You'd be surprised.
On the note, I really liked that homework that you had us do early on. Our very first food episode, you talked about making a list of shelf stable meals
Yep.
where everything you could cook without refrigeration.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people in their mind, they're like, if I'm out of food and there are no stores, that's when I'm picking up my rifle and going to that obscure neighbor's house that I know of and I don't like
Mm-hmm.
that much. But I think if you put in things into perspective, like the hurricanes and those communities, they didn't go robbing each other with guns
Right.
to get food. They didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think um, pocket-sized disasters are more likely to affect most of our listeners
Yep.
than complete everything shut down. It's a free for all. Um,
Right.
so work on those soft skills that we've talked about too.
Mm-hmm.
you raise a great point. I mean, sure, right now in Los Angeles, I think they've arrested
Mhm.
29 people for looting or something like that. But you use that as an example, or the hurricanes down south
Mhm.
late last year as an example. People aren't out shooting each other for food.
No.
They're going to shoot a deer or a bear or a squirrel or the neighbor's cow before they're going to shoot each other.
Mhm.
Um, one skill we haven't gotten into on the show because it's sort of a hot button issue, is that of hunting. Now I grew up in a house, a hunting household. Uh, there were years when the paper mill, when the union was on strike, that my father fed us through hunting. His parents did the same. I myself do not enjoy hunting. I've never enjoyed it. Didn't like it as a kid. Don't like it as an adult. But it's skills that I still know I have. I know how to field dress an animal. Um, I still target practice, so I know I could bring the animal down uh, without causing it to suffer. Um, Fishing is another skill, and again, these are things that maybe you don't have to go out and practice, folks, but you should learn the basics. Be it just from reading a book or watching a YouTube video. Um, you know, but when it comes to some of these other skills, uh, Jim, they've got to do more than watch a YouTube video or read a book.
Right.
Listen to this
Right.
podcast, right?
The YouTube and books, they're a great starting point, but that's not the stopping point. You need to actually get outside and practice doing these things. Whether we're talking about starting a fire under bad conditions, even just spending the night outside. A lot of people haven't done or haven't done since they were little kids. You know, these are things we call it dirt time. You need to put in the dirt time. You need to put in the time outside practicing and honing these skills. Um, with, hunting and fishing. It's one thing to read a book about how to field dress a squirrel or a raccoon or a possum or whatever. It's another thing to get out there and do it and to see what it looks like up close and in person. You know, um, view, don't get me wrong, YouTube is a wonderful educational tool. It really is. You can learn a ton of stuff off of YouTube, but you're not going to really absorb those skills and make them yours without doing it yourself. You know, and this is a very common error that people make in the prepper world is they watch a couple of videos, they read a couple of books. Oh, I know how to do it. No, you really don't. Not unless you've actually been out there and done it, you know? And this ties in with what we were talking about earlier about buying stuff. If you're buying gear, you need to use it. You need to know how it works. You need to take it out of the box, put it together, and put it to use. Get a very firm understanding of what it will do, what it won't do, how it works, how to maintain it, the whole 9 yards. I've lost count of the number of people I've run into over the years who bought a generator because they were afraid of losing power during a crisis, never fired it up, never put fuel in it, and then when the time comes, they have not a clue how to start it or how
Yep.
to put it to use. My friend Jay Barry Miller runs a company called Tough Possum Gear. He is one of my very favorite people on the planet. And he learned how to, his business is making packs and duffels and slings and all this kind of stuff. And he learned to do this because he couldn't find what he wanted to purchase. So he learned how to make this stuff himself, became very, very skilled at it, and has a thriving business today. And one of the things he talks about is what he calls talismans of safety. These are things that preppers and others will buy and carry and keep with them, but they've never used it. They carry it because they think it makes them feel good. It makes them feel prepared to have this thing, this totem with them.
Yeah.
But it's never been field tested. It's never been pressure tested. It's just as likely to fall apart as it is anything else. And by the way, tough in this case is spelled Tuff.
All right. So for those watching it on YouTube, ignore Brian's typo there.
It's TUFF Possum Gear.
All right.
I made the
But-
same mistake taking notes. So.
Yep. It's a common one. I should have mentioned it at the outset. Um, but these talismans of safety, the problem is you carry it like an example. You go out and you buy one of these pre-made emergency kits for your car. Okay, and it's got an emergency blanket in it, and it's got some tools in it, and things like that. You buy it, you feel good about yourself, and you throw it in the trunk, and you forget about it. You feel good that you did that to push yourself forward in your prepper journey. 6 months down the road, you break down. Oh, I've got my emergency kit. I finally get to use it. And you take it out of the box and you start unpacking it, and you start trying to repair your vehicle, and the wrenches are all just like pretzels. They all just bend apart on you because they're very poor quality. It's starting to get cold, so you take out the Mylar emergency blanket, and you go to shake it open, and you realize it's falling apart along every fold, and you have nothing but ribbons of
Mm.
Mylar.
Mhm.
And what did you accomplish by purchasing this kit? Nothing.
Right.
All you did was empty your wallet for somebody else. You never looked inside it. You had no idea the quality of this stuff, but you felt good for 6 months because you knew you had it just in case, right? So you got that going for you. The point here is anything you buy, you need to test. You need to get familiar with it. You need to put it together and make sure that the guy working the assembly line that day wasn't having a bad day and forgot to put something in the box. Because when you're 2 weeks down into a grid down scenario, you can't just fire up Google or Amazon and order a new one.
Hmm.
You know, um, some people will recommend going to the dollar store to buy various things that you might want to put in an emergency kit. I'm not going to say it's a bad idea, but it's a bad idea.
Particularly when it comes to tools and wrenches and things like that.
Exactly.
Oh, why? Please tell me.
If I can take a box end wrench in my hands and just do this,
Oh my goodness.
I don't want to rely on that to fix my vehicle when I'm broken down. There are certain things that I probably would be okay getting at a dollar store, but not a lot of things. Um, Quite often, like medication, like over the counter things like aspirin and Tylenol, and that you can get it cheap at the dollar store, but you're only getting like 15 capsules in that package when you can go to Walmart and buy 200 of them for $4. You
Mhm.
know, you need to, and I understand that spending $4 on Tylenol isn't feasible for some people. For some people, that dollar they're spending, that's the only dollar they have. I
Mhm.
get that. I totally understand that. We all have limitations. We all have things that we have to work against, and we need to find ways to work around. Okay. Like I said, there is no one size fits all solution. But if you do the math and you can afford it, you're better off buying these medications at a Walmart or something like that. You're getting a lot more bang for your buck.
Yep.
You know,
The same
uh,
applies to, we've talked in the past about food pantries. We've talked
mhm,
about bug out bags. The same rule of thumb applies there. You can't just, stick everything in your bug out bag and stick it in your mud room or the backseat of your car and forget about it.
right.
The canned goods and water you put in there eventually are going to perish.
Hmm.
Um, Jim brought up a great example with the Mylar blanket. You need to get that stuff out every once in a while and make sure it still holds up, make sure it's still durable, that it's not spoiled, that it hasn't expired. And the same goes with your food pantry too. We've talked about rotation,
Mhm.
talked about this and that. You can't just stock up on 6 months worth of dried goods and then just leave them sit there because 10
Yeah.
years later, how many of them are still going to be good?
Hmm.
you know
One of the things I recommend when it comes to emergency kits, whether we're talking about bug out bag, get home bag, what evacuate, whatever, at least twice a year. You should give every kit a complete shakedown. Take every single thing out of the
Mhm.
backpack or bag, whatever you're using, examine everything in it, make sure it's still in good condition. If you have something that runs on batteries, make sure the batteries haven't leaked. Make sure water bottles haven't leaked. Make sure everything that's supposed to be in there is actually still in there and you didn't use something for another purpose and forget to replace it at least twice a year. A good way that a lot of people will do this is when it comes time to change the clocks for daylight savings back
Oh,
and forth.
okay.
Those days, or at least that weekend, you spend time giving all your kits a shakedown and checking everything out. It's just an easy way to remember to do it.
And also, if you have children, don't forget that they have grown. So if you have shoes and
Mhm.
sweaters inside your bug out bags, you need to switch those out to sizes that fit your children.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
you may have grown too. So check
Oh,
your own
shoot.
sizes.
Hey,
Not
easy
not
now.
not
Easy.
you, Dacia. I was thinking more myself, but thinking
Well,
that
Dacia, you might find the things that you put in there 3 months ago are now too big.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, I, on the other hand, not so much. I'm punching holes in my belt in the other direction.
But it's true. I mean, double check sizes. Shoes
Mhm.
for adults should be okay. Those old like last season's tennis shoes are pretty good. Your socks are usually going to be okay.
Mhm.
Um, but everything else, just double check.
Yep.
all right. Can we think of any more common prepping mistakes?
The other one I wanted to make sure we talked about is burnout,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where you're trying to do too much too fast. This happens often with somebody who's brand new and feels like they need to play catch up in a hurry, and they will start trying to learn everything in a day. It's not going to happen. You're not going to get there overnight. You need to pace yourself. Otherwise, you are going to get burned out. You're going to reach a point where it's like, I have no interest in this anymore. I don't care if a bomb drops on my house. I'm done. You know, which, I mean, okay, but there, the better approach is to pace yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Make a list of the things, say the top 10 skills you want to learn and tackle them one at a time. You know, you don't need to do it all overnight. The world's probably going to be here tomorrow. Yes, things look ugly right now in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the world. But as we always say, Dacia,
Everything's going to be okay.
That's right.
exactly.
It will. It will. All right. Jim Cobb, Dacia M. Arnold, myself, Brian Keene. We appreciate you tuning in. If this is your first time listening, uh, please go back and listen to our other episodes. We're quite fond of them. This is episode 19, so there's 18 others you can listen to. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify or a place like that, consider leaving us a 5-star review if you think we've earned it. YouTube, please chime in the comments. We do try to read those as time allows. Jim, any idea what we're going to talk about next week?
I think next week we're going to talk about communication.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for communicating that to us. We will
Hey,
see
not a
you
problem.
next week, folks.